G'day folks. So today I'm going to show you how to get started on Tinkecad, how it works, and how you can start designing things for our 3D printers. Now in this class you're going to be manufacturing things using the 3D printers and also using the laser cutter. We're going to focus on the 3D printing side of things today. I will show you how to use the laser cutter in sort of coming lessons and coming videos. So there's different levels at which you can jump in and design things. This is one level, right? This is Tinkercad. Tinkercad is a little bit intuitive. Means it sort of makes sense, I think, from the get-go. It's probably not the most advanced tool you could be using, but you can use it to create reasonably complex designs. It's also probably slightly better to use if you're more interested in making something that's arty, rather than making something that is sort of like a mechanical thing, that has a lot of moving parts. So arty, Tinkercad's probably pretty good. All right, so whether it's Tinkercad or whether it's another program, one of the biggest things you're going to need to learn when it comes to 3D design or any sort of design is how to think about an object that you want to make in terms of simpler sort of shapes. Simpler three-dimensional shapes and also simpler two-dimensional shapes, right? Both of those are really valid. So to show you what I mean, I have got an image here, and it's a spanner, and I chose a spanner because I chose a spanner. Um, Now, if we think about this spanner, right, um, the easiest way to design this to manufacture in a 3D printer or to even laser cut this out, you could laser cut one of these if you wanted to, is to think about it in terms of its more sort of simple shapes. Now, in Tinkercad, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, uh, I'm going to tell you that you can do two real things. You can, sorry, I just went to create and design there. You can add shapes and you can take shapes away. Now, what I mean by that is that you can sort of stick different simple shapes together to make a more complicated object, and you can also use a um, complicated. Sorry, you can also use a shape to cut out other shapes from that design, and I'm going to do both of those on that spanner today. So before we get started, this is your workspace in Tinkercad, right? Here is your work plane. You can think of that as being like the floor. Now, I like to use a mouse. There's lots of computer mice in our classroom. Trust me, this will be so much easier with a mouse. The trackpads are, in my opinion, just absolutely awful to use for this. But you do what works for you. But I would recommend a mouse. Now, we can navigate around this world. So you can click on this cube and you can drag it around, and that'll change your view. Right. You can also hold Shift on your keyboard, click the middle mouse button, and you can move it around as well. If you just click the middle, actually, hold up, if you just click the middle mouse button, uh, it moves around. If you hold the leftmost mouse button, no, sorry, the rightmost mouse button, your view will rotate like this. You can also zoom in and out. There are little zoomy symbols here. So in and out. You can also zoom in and out using the scroll wheel on your mouse. Another really good reason to have a mouse, right? So if I had something in the middle here and I really wanted to work on it in detail, I could zoom right in and then I could sort of rotate around it. And I could also move it around like that. So that's how you navigate the world. If you ever get super, super lost, just hit the home. It'll move everything back to this view for you. It can be super handy. All right, so designing anything in Tinkercad, we think in terms of shapes. So we think about what is it that we want to design. And normally we'd come through and we'd make some sort of concept sketches, so that we had a really clear image of what we wanted to do. What I also like to do is to draw my design in terms of its actual basic shapes. I'm not going to be able to do that today because I'm working on the computer. Whatever. Let's look at this spanner. So this spanner, well, what do we got here? We've got a rectangle shape. All right, cool. We've got obviously a circle here, and that's got some sort of star-shaped indentations on it. This shape here is sort of almost like a teardrop, or it's kind of a round shape with sort of a triangular shape attached to it. And this shape here is pretty close to being a circle. It's kind of an egg shape. Right? If I thought about that, that would be an egg shape. And then this is kind of like a square with a bit of a curve in it. All right, cool. So we've got some basic shapes, right? Circle, kind of a triangle or an egg shape here, kind of an egg shape here, rectangle here, square in the middle. The other thing that is handy for me is that I know this is a 13 mil spanner. So I know there is 13 millimeters between this face here and this face here because it holds a nut. That's what it does with the spanner. Cool. So I'm going to design that, or I'm going to make it up in Tinkecad. And I'm going to start with the head because I think that's going to give you the easiest way to sort of get a grip to what I mean. Okay, so on this plane over here, on the right-hand side, we have all of your shapes, right? There's a heap of shapes. There's also like heaps more in Tinkecad as well. But the basic shapes is really the place that you should start. So I said that there was an egg shape, right? That was the head of the spanner. So I'm going to just grab a cylinder for a start, and I'm going to just throw a cylinder in there. Now, it's not an egg shape. You can see that, but it'll do. So what I'm going to do, now that I've got that cylinder in there, I can manipulate its size and shape. So if I click over here, I can click this and I can hold it and drag, and that works pretty well with a mouse. The other thing that I can do is once I've clicked on it, I can just click on the measurement and I can hit a number, and then I can press enter, and it'll just move to exactly what that number is. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to say that I'm going to make my spanner 4 millimeters thick, right? So I'm going to change my view because I'm going to change the size of this circle, and it's easier if I'm looking at it from the top. So I'm going to click the top like that. And there's one other thing that I can do to make this a little bit easier, and that is to change my kind of view. And to do that, I click this little button over here, which is orthographic. Now we're in orthographic view. Now we're in perspective view. See how they're slightly different? Right. Orthographic view is really good for like changing the size and shape of stuff along like 2 dimensions. So at the moment I only want to change these two, so it makes perfect sense to me to have it viewed like this. So my spanner's 13 mil, so I need a 13 mil cutout in this thing. So if I think about this, 20 mil minus 13 mil, that's only going to give me 3 mil by the time I cut my spanner out. That's not really enough for me, I don't think. So I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. I'm going to make that 26. And I'm going to drag this out. And I'm just going to drag this out until it looks right to me. And maybe that's 28. Yeah, that can kind of work. All right, cool. And now my spanner, it needs a cutout. So I'm going to give it a cutout. All right, so for my cutout, that's pretty straightforward. I'm going to grab my box shape. I'm going to stick it in there. And this, see how it's in hole mode? That means that you can use it to chop things out of other things. You can change any shape to be a hole, right? So any shape can be a hole, right? You just have to change the option there. Now, if I'm doing a hole and I'm just cutting it in this, I don't actually need to shrink this down so that it's 4 millimeters. I could have it be a little bit taller than the shape. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to just leave it at 5 mil. I'm going to go back to my top view, and I'm going to change my box so that it is 13 mil, because that's my spanner, by, I don't know, I'm really spitballing here, 16 mil, something like that. Maybe a little bit less. Maybe I'll make that 14 mil. All right, cool. Now, one thing that I'm going to do though is, because I actually want this to fit a nut, I'm going to need to make this slightly bigger than 13, because 3D printing tends to make holes a little bit smaller because it squeezes plastic out to make the thing. And in that squeezing, sometimes the gaps and the holes that you design can shrink a little bit. So I'm going to make this 13.2. Actually, maybe even less, maybe 13.1. Right? And that's going to be my gap. Now, I need to drop this hole into this shape. And one thing that I'm noticing is that I'm really not happy with how that looks. If we look at what an actual spanner looks like, it looks like the cutout goes a lot further. So I'm just going to grab that and make it quite a bit bigger. I'm going to make it 18 mil. And then what I'm going to do is just try and move it into a position that I'm really happy with. That'll do. And now I need to combine them so that I can cut this out of this. To do that, I need to click on this shape, and then I need to hold Shift on my computer and click the next shape. Once I've got them both selected, I can click Group, which is up here. And that's going to cut that shape out for me. All right. Now, let me just pause you guys for a sec. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and put a little bit of a curve in here, because on our spanner, you can see we've got a little bit of a curve. So the way I'm going to do that is I'll just grab a cylinder, and I need to remember that I made this 13.1, because that's how big I want my cylinder, by, I don't know, 4 mil, maybe 5 mil. Not looking bad. And I'm going to drop that into this little space in here. So I've got that selected already, so I'm just going to hold Shift, click this bit, group them both together. Off we go. All right, that's looking a little bit more like a spanner head. Now, to make it match the rest of my spanner, I am going to need to rotate it a little bit. So I can click on it, and then I've got this arrow. Now, which arrow you can see really depends a lot on what angle you're looking at your finger from. So if I'm looking at this sort of angle, then I can rotate it in lots of different ways. But if I just want to rotate it on this flat plane, then it's easiest if I look at it from the top. So there we go. Now, same as before, you can either grab and drag, or you can actually type in a degree. For this one, I'm going to grab and drag. It's probably a little bit too much. And if you can only, let's just go undo, undo. Now, if you can only move it in sort of big jumps, the further out you move your mouse, the more precise you're going to be able to be. So I reckon 7 degrees looks pretty good. 8 degrees. I'm happy enough with that. All right, there's the head of my spanner. So the rest of my spanner is really just a rectangle. So I just grab a box. Make that 4 mil tall. Make it as wide as I think it needs to be. What do we reckon? 12 mil, something like that. And then let's put a ring on the end of it. So if I can click this shape, I need to remember how big that is, because it'd be nice if they sort of matched up. So it was 26 by maybe 28, I think. I'm just having to sort of eyeball it because I moved it around. So something like this. 28. 6. Now this one really is just a round bit, isn't it? Because if we look at this spanner. All right, cool. So I might want to make this a little bit smaller, because as it is, it does kind of look silly. Doesn't look like a spanner. What do we got? So it's going to have a 13 mil hole in the middle. And so we're going to want to make this, I don't know, maybe 3 mil bigger. So that would be 19 by 19. We'll see how we go with that. Looks a little small. Maybe we'll go 20 by 20. And our hole. Now, in situations like this, right, where we're trying to move this, for this to be perfectly in the middle, it's actually got to be less than, I've got to move it less than a millimeter, which is really difficult to do, right? See how it only wants to move in sort of 1 millimeter jumps? So now that I've tried to move it around, before I click anything else, I can tell it I want it to move 0.5 of a mil, and then I can tell it that I want it to move minus 0.5 might do it. Beautiful. And that's moved it exactly where I want it. Now, this circle isn't quite right. There's a lot of this like funky star-shaped stuff that you need to add. Also, it's got to be bigger, turns out, to fit the nut in there, because a nut is a hexagon, and so the hole actually needs to be bigger than 13 millimeters to fit that hexagon. But I'm not going to muck around with that because I think you've seen the basics of sort of building shapes. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. I might make this a little bit bigger just because I'm still not happy with how it looks. And now I gotta do this one again. Yep, okay, I'm happy with that. All right, so now that I have my shape, I'm going to select all the different pieces of it. This piece, this piece, this piece, this piece, and I'm going to group them all together. And that's going to make it one solid object. All right, now, obviously from here, I could come in and I could add other shapes to sort of try and smooth out parts of this design. All right, I could add some little triangle shapes in here to try and smooth that out. Same as here. I could put details on here. I could even write on this and get, you know, um, something that sort of is embossed into this with like a name or a size or something like that. Um, you can also, if you click on your shape, if you need to work with it or you need to change things, click on your shape and you can click ungroup and it'll break it all apart for you. And then you can change individual bits and stick it back together. Right, I'm going to undo that. Now, the aim of the game here is not to make a spanner, right? You don't have to make a spanner. What I want you to do is to, sort of make whatever you'd like, with an eye to, I guess, thinking about things that you might like to produce in this class more broadly. I'm not fussed about what you make. Um, there are a couple of guidelines which I wrote up on the lesson plan, but you do need to build some fundamental skills, and this 3D design is one of those skills. So find a shape or find a design that you want to make, build it up in Tinkecad if you want to use Tinkecad, and I'll touch base with you next time I see you. Cheers, guys.